What's up, guys? We have a special podcast episode for you today. We're going to be talking about the LA Kings with two people that work for the LA Kings. Starting off with Zach Dooley, the manager and editorial content for the LA Kings, and Jesse Cohen, who runs the All Kings Men podcast, which is the official LA Kings podcast. And with that being said, just a word from our sponsors, which is Bet99. So, guys, don't forget that you have to be 19 years old and up to play. You have to play responsibly. The code is Young Guns 1. And if you guys want to place any bets, you could do so. There's a link below in our description, and you could click on that. And also, the Mind Foundation Canada as well. They are doing research for neurological disease and disorders. They're currently trying to raise funds and awareness to find cures for that, and they're currently focused on mental health. So you guys can find them in the link in the description below as well. So, guys, today we're talking some LA Kings hockey, and we all know the big trade that happened during the offseason, which is the Kevin Fiala trade, a trade that shocked a lot of people. And I think, according to what I was reading, a lot of people were kind of hesitant with the return that the Minnesota Wild got, and people were like, "Wait, I think that's a little bit too much for Kevin Fiala." But he is only 24 years old. He's had a fantastic season with the Minnesota Wild, and they were looking for a top, player to play on the first line. And there was rumors at one point that maybe Philip Forsberg would have been that guy, but unfortunately he resigns with the Nashville Predators. So essentially, what are your thoughts on that trade acquiring Kevin Fiala to the LA Kings?
Well, I can start on it. I think that Kevin Fiala is a natural fit for the Kings for a lot of different reasons. I mean, he's a first-line player, over a point per game guy last season with Minnesota. He fits from an age range perspective. He's pretty young, a 26-year-old forward. He's not too old, but also he's an established NHL player. And yeah, while the return was certainly a lot, if you look at how the Kings are set up from a prospects point of view, they're very heavy in terms of right shot defensemen who are young. They have Sean Dursey, Jordan Spence, Brant Clark, who are all young players looking to get in. So right-handed D in the prospect pool was certainly a position of strength. And with the first round pick, the Kings have had a lot of draft picks from the rebuild they've run over the last few years, and they were in the right time to give up those kind of assets to get a game changer at the NHL level.
Yeah, I agree, obviously, with everything that Zach said. I'll just add on Kevin Fiala. He scored, I think he would have been tied for first or second in goals on the Kings last season. But he's also a playmaker, which I think the Kings also needed. We lost a couple guys in the offseason, Dustin Brown, Andreas Athanasiou. Guys like Adrian Kempe put up a ton of goals. Victor Arvidson brought in last offseason to be a goal scorer, not necessarily going to play with Kevin Fiala, but you want a playmaker to set up your goal scorers as well as a guy who can create his own shot. And I think the versatility of Fiala's game made him additionally ideal.
Yeah, I think just kind of adding to what you guys were saying, I was actually very surprised that he ended up in LA. I thought a player that caliber was a guy that I didn't see LA as a destination, and then once he actually got there, I was like, oh wait, actually that does make a lot of sense. They do need a player like this, and he kind of fits what the LA Kings are trying to do here. They're a young team. They're a team that I think surprised a lot of people last year during the regular season as well. Put themselves in a position to make the playoffs. They forced the Oilers to Game 7. It was a fun series and a fun team to watch. And I think the Kings, they're kind of trying to build that identity of being fun to watch, but also being a young and skilled team, kind of the way they are. And so I think Fiala adds to that in a lot of ways. I think, kind of like you mentioned, like you guys mentioned, it's going to help the goal scoring aspect of things as well. Kempe had 35 goals last year on a team that didn't really score that many goals as well, and also they had Philip Danault as well, who ended up with 27. So adding a guy like Kevin Fiala to potentially score goals, but also add more scoring to the team, I think would be huge for the LA Kings moving forward. And even a guy like potentially Arthur Kaliev, if he gets an opportunity to play with Fiala, could definitely benefit from him as well. So yeah, just kind of my thoughts on that.
And Chris, your thoughts?
I mean, listen, I think that was a very good trade. I don't understand the fans saying that Minnesota got a bit too much. Like Zach mentioned, they had so many young defensemen, especially on the right hand side, that I mean they could have parted ways with that with someone like that to get Kevin Fiala in return. And it's not he's young still. He signed long term. I think the Kings have like just a few older guys, and the older guys are great mentors for the younger kids that are coming up. This team's going to be pretty competitive, I would say, for the next uh, 6-7 seasons with the team that they have right now, and Kevin Fiala being the goal scorer that he is. I think this team's going to be very competitive next season.
And I feel like they keep on adding to like the things that they're missing. So last year they add Philip Danault, who takes on the defensive responsibilities away from Anze Kopitar, because being one of the best two-way forwards in the league, sometimes it's a little bit too much. So adding Philip Danault helps Kopitar focus more on his offensive game, whereas now they also add scoring, something that in my opinion, I think they needed a presence like Kevin Fiala, a guy who was a good playmaker. And I at first I thought that maybe Philip Forsberg would have gone to LA because he is good friends with Victor Arvidson. So I was kind of surprised that didn't happen. And actually I think there was also some rumors going around that they wouldn't have minded adding Philip Forsberg if he was available as well, even though they acquired Kevin Fiala.
I'm just gonna hop in there. I think there's 31 teams in the league that wouldn't have minded adding Philip Forsberg. So, yeah, sure. I think the Kings probably wouldn't have minded. The amount of players that get rumored to go to teams that are in the situation that the Kings have been in for the last few years, it doesn't matter what season it is, doesn't matter what players they are. Those guys are going to be rumored to go wherever there's cap space and wherever there's a clear need for a player of that caliber. I will just say about Arvidson. Arvidson and Fiala are also close friends and have family members that are close friends. So I don't think that was a coincidence.
Well, I think just kind of on that, I'm like I said, I think Fiala is a good fit in LA, but I think it's good when you have familiarity, especially with some players, and like you mentioned, the friendship between Arvidson and Fiala, definitely could have been a difference maker in the reason why this deal went the way it did. But I think having a familiarity and like you guys mentioned, and also just being able to add a guy who he's familiar with in that locker room is going to help him, not only with the locker room and being able to build relationships, but also on the ice. He's played with Arvidson before, and I think for Kevin Fiala, he was successful alongside Victor Arvidson. So I think in LA, if he can translate that to the way they were when they were in Nashville together, I think that's going to be huge for both the players. So just happy for that. And I don't know if Chris wants to add anything.
I mean, right now he's projected to be playing with Kempe and Kopitar, and Arvidson's still going to be staying with Danault and Trevor Moore. I mean, they could be shifted. But according to Daily Faceoffs, that's the projected lineup so far. So I don't know if they're going to be playing together. Maybe maybe on the power play or something.
And the biggest surprise for the LA Kings, in my opinion, was Trevor Moore. A guy who's never reached over 23 points in a season before last year. And he gets 48 points, 17 goals, and 31 assists in 81 games. So, guys, I wanted to hear your thoughts on what Trevor Moore did exactly to have a career season last year.
I think that the biggest thing, and this is something that head coach Todd McClellan has said a few times, is that he got an opportunity. Todd McClellan and his staff took a lot of the responsibility for the way Trevor Moore started the season because he was kind of a Swiss Army knife player. He never got a chance to play in the top six. He was never put in a role that was expected to produce offensively, similar to kind of how he was used when he was in Toronto. And as a result, the point production wasn't there. But once, right around the new year, he played on the left with, as you mentioned, Chris, he was with Danault and Arvidson. Became a very nice line for the LA Kings down the second half of the season. They clicked extremely well. They complemented each other extremely well. And I think that Trevor Moore's point production was a result of how well those three guys played together and the opportunity that he finally had to play, in an offensive role, because Jesse, as you saw night in, night out, like that's a guy who has some speed, he has some skill, and he does a lot of things really, really well.
And Zach and I were there when late in the season there was some talk of splitting up other lines that were struggling, and Todd McClellan told us if there was any line that was going to be changed, it would be the Danault, Arvidson, Moore line, because I think the words he used, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, was that Danault and Moore were the engine of the team, and that he was reluctant to split up any lines because it would mean breaking up that line. But if they were going to break up a line to generate offense, it would be to take those two guys that he saw as driving play and maybe spread it around. But I think the team and the coaching staff really likes that line. I certainly know that the broadcasters and those of us who watch them game in and game out recognize just how special that line was down the stretch.
And I think what's interesting too, and obviously you mentioned Philip Danault, and I know that us being from Montreal and being Habs fans, we've seen quite a bit of Philip Danault as well. And for us, I think what surprised me the most about not only Trevor Moore and his production and how well he played, but seeing Philip Danault score 27 goals last year was a bit of a surprise for a lot of Habs fans, right? Because he wasn't known as that goal-scoring threat. He wasn't known as the guy that was going to produce offense. He was a guy that was more the defensive forward. He would play the big minutes to kind of be that defensive player for the Canadians. But 27 goals is a career high for him, and he was a guy that I found his scoring touch in LA, and it was a good fit when they signed him. And I said that he was going to do well in LA, and he had a really good year last year, and I'm expecting him to do good things again this year. But just kind of your thoughts on what you guys thought of Philip Danault and his performance this season, and what if you guys liked him. I'm assuming you did, but yeah. I don't know if Zach or Jesse wants to.
I'll start this one off, Zach. So I've been a Kings fan since the mid '80s, and in one season of hockey, Philip Danault has jumped into my top 10 favorite Kings of all time.
Oh wow!
Wow!
Yeah, I love Philip Danault. From the first time we interviewed him after the free agent signing, he said everything that I love to hear as a hockey fan. I think one of the first quotes he gave us was "Culture is everything. With the right culture, you can beat anyone." Every shift he plays exactly the way you want to root for a guy playing for your team. He's fantastic, and I'm still bitter about '93, so I'm super happy that we took him away from you and you guys don't get to watch it.
That makes me really sad hearing that.
I could echo that a little. Like, Phil Danault just does everything well. Jesse kind of hammered home the off the ice things that he does, but on the ice, he just does everything the right way. Like, he doesn't sacrifice defense to score goals. Like, he scored 27 goals, but it didn't come at the expense of the defensive play, Luca, that you talked about in Montreal. And what I loved about Danault's goal scoring is if you look at a heat map of his offense, it's basically just a dot right outside the crease. Like, all of his goals came from the same area because he just has a knack for getting himself to the net. He puts himself in a goal scorer's position and he buries. He gets deflections, he gets rebounds, he gets skill goals, and he sets up goals too by getting himself to the right area on the ice. And I think that plays into the player that you saw in Montreal. He's extremely smart. He knows where to be and when to be there. And I think this year, with the right role and the right opportunity, he translated that intelligence into a really good offensive year.
And, I think a question that everyone is wondering in Montreal is how awkward was it for Marc Bergevin to be hired as a senior advisor?
I was all fixed. I'm convinced.
Chris,
and
this is Chris's favorite person.
I hate him. Sorry.
Being reunited with Philip Danault, a guy that he was in negotiations with for a new contract, and that never transpired, which is why he walked to the LA Kings. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'm not aware of any awkwardness at all.
Okay.
He's followed him everywhere: Chicago, Montreal, now LA. It's crazy.
Yeah, can't say I picked up on any either. Maybe something that's more fun as a speculation story than a reality. But yeah, I can't say I noticed any myself either.
Are you guys big fans of Marc Bergevin?
I'm unfamiliar with the body of. I mean, I know who he is, but I can't say that I spent a lot of time analyzing his career.
It's a good read. Uh, it is, honestly. It's he has a really nice highlight too. He scores in his own net, I think, on one of them.
Hey,
Yeah, with his hand.
Yeah, with his
Um,
hand, it's true. He threw it in there, top
was
shelf.
it Dan Boyle that did the same thing?
Dan
And
Boyle, yeah.
I'd happily have taken Dan Boyle's career. So
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
okay.
I think
We can move on from that now.
I think
Alright.
Bergevin's managerial career is one that we can question at a later date, but it's definitely interesting. But I just find it interesting, like Chris said, I just find it interesting that Dano ended up in LA and Bergevin ended up in LA shortly after too, especially when there was tension between, or reported tension between him and Dano's camp, one coming to sign a contract extension. So I just find it kind of ironic, but it is the hockey world and anything's possible at this point. So, anyways, kind of moving on, Chris. I don't know, Christopher. I don't know if you want to move on to something else.
Yeah, so just looking at the projected roster for the LA Kings this upcoming season, a guy that had a high ceiling and was in demand by Montreal when Max Pacioretty was first rumored to be traded was Gabriel Velarde, a guy that LA had a lot of promise for. Unfortunately, he hasn't been able to gain a full roster spot as of right now. He's kind of been in and out of the AHL, NHL. So, guys, I would like to hear your thoughts in terms of what to expect from Gabriel Velarde heading to the season.
I think the big thing last year with Gabe was he started the season as a center, played Jesse, maybe the first 10 games or so as a third line center. Didn't quite work out, went down to the AHL for a good chunk of time. And the big thing there was that they moved him from center to wing. So in the AHL, he was about a point per game. He moved to the wing. He came back up for the last couple of months of the season and seemed to be a much better fit at the NHL level playing on the wing. Very big body with outstanding hands. Very skilled player who hasn't quite put it together from an offensive standpoint at the NHL level. But I think the consensus within the Kings organization was they see Gabe probably more as a wing than as a center long term. And he put in a lot of valuable work to learn and develop at that position this year, which would likely be, if he makes the team out of camp, it'll probably be as a winger.
I can see the arc of Gabe Velarde's career being somewhat similar to Trevor Moore. Obviously higher ceiling, higher draft pedigree. But when Zach was talking about Trevor Moore earlier, and he mentioned the coaching staff taking responsibility for not having found Trevor Moore a home, so to speak, on a line. Gabriel Velarde, when he finally joined the team on a full-time basis, was asked to play second line center during the COVID shortened season with the weird divisions. With who did he start the season? I think he started the season with Carter and Lazat
Kempe and Carter.
Right. And that lasted like a couple of games, and then they shuffled the lineups, and that lasted a couple of games. And then last season in the preseason, he was on a line with Vladimir Tkachev and Lias Anderson. They looked great in the preseason. Anderson got hurt before the season started. Tkachev was assigned down to Ontario. So all of a sudden, this line that he looked great on was broken up. And last season, the team struggled in the first half maybe to find line identities that worked. And then very quickly, Kaliev, Lazat, and Lemieux established themselves as a line. By Christmas, Deneau, Arvidson, and Moore had established themselves as a line. And those two lines, your second and fourth, arguably, weren't going to be changed. And then you had Kopitar, and Kempe was having himself an all-star season. And they were still trying to find minutes for Andreas Athanasiou when he was healthy, Dustin Brown, Rasmus Kupari played over 50 games because Quentin Byfield. Like, the point is there was a lot of shifting, except for these weird pillars that weren't going to change, the Lazat line and the Deneau line. So I'm not sure that Gabriel Velarde ever was able to find a home. This season, I could see potentially him finding a home and having an opportunity to settle into a role the way that Trevor Moore did last year. Even though, like I said, Gabriel Velarde's skill set and his draft pedigree and theoretically his ceiling should be much higher than Trevor Moore.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think at one point, or I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but I think he had suffered an injury too that kind of laid like hit him back a little bit and kind of forced him out a little bit too. So maybe that must have, obviously the connection with, switching lines and not being able to find a home probably plays an effect too. But I don't know, has he like declared that he's 100% playing, ready to play, or do you think that he's still maybe suffering from an injury from the past that he's been dealing with for a while? Because I know that at one point, I'm pretty sure he was injured at one point. I think missed the remainder of the season. So I'm curious about that, because I was high on Gabe Vilardi when they drafted him, and obviously I expected him to be on an NHL roster right now and doing really well. But obviously the trajectory of his career hasn't really panned out that way so far. Doesn't mean it can't, but it just hasn't panned out so far. So do you think that maybe the fact that he was injured for a while or had that injury maybe plays an effect in the reason why he's where he is right now in his career?
I think it has an effect on how he's perceived. Gabe essentially lost 2 years of development. He was drafted in 2017. The injury you're referencing has been kind of a back injury of sorts. Cost him the end of his year coming out of the draft. Cost him basically the entire 2018-19 season. He played 4 games all year, and it cost him the first 2 to 3 months of the 19-20 season. So if you look at his development arc, he lost the second half of his 18-year-old year. He lost basically his entire 19-year-old year, and he lost the first half of his 20-year-old year.
Yeah,
like, that's a lot of development time for a young player who, as you guys know, was one of the best players in the OHL skill-wise at that time. He basically missed the 2 years where he should have been absolutely dominating the OHL. And then he comes into Ontario 2019-20. That season gets cut off by COVID. Then you look at 2021. That season was shortened to 50 games. So you look at all the time that Gabe's missed. I don't think it's playing a factor right now where he's at. But if you look at all the time that maybe he missed, you could see why, he is pretty far out from when he was drafted, but he's not quite as experienced as some of the other guys in that draft class because of injury.
Yeah.
And another player that – sorry, go ahead, Luca.
Well, I just want to say one last thing. I mean, last year he did really well in Ontario. He had 38 points in 39 games. So it looks like he might be, like you guys mentioned before, maybe making the roster right out of training camp and potentially being a constant regular in the LA Kings lineup for the season. So, I mean, I guess that there's some promise there to the fact that he put up almost a point per game numbers in the AHL, which is pretty impressive for a kid of his talent and his caliber.
He signed a 1-year contract extension in the offseason that was a one-way deal. Right, Zach? I think I have that right. Yeah. So I mean, not that whether or not a player has a one-way deal or a two-way deal is the be-all and end-all of whether or not they get a shot in the NHL. But I would assume because of that, he would be given every opportunity over some of his teammates who, are still waivers exempt or have two-way deals.
Yeah.
And another player that I would like to talk about here today is a guy that was drafted second overall in 2020. And obviously, when you're drafted that high in a draft, people expect you to be in Calder conversations as soon as you enter the league. Unfortunately, that has not been the case for Quentin Biofield. He's been dealt, not necessarily the best card in terms of how he would like his career to start with the LA Kings. He's been dealt with a lot of injuries, and there's some people calling him a bust, which I think is unjust. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
All right, I'm going to start this one off, Zach. One of I call it the mantra of my podcast, All the King's Men, is the notion that happiness is measured by expectation. And so we try and encourage fans to keep reasonable expectations when it comes to evaluating players or development. Quentin Byfield was drafted in the midst of the pandemic. The first season that he was able to play professional hockey, he played in the AHL because the OHL wasn't playing and he wasn't necessarily ready for a role in the NHL. But he looked fine, absolutely better than fine. He looked great as an 18-year-old in the AHL. And then last season, it was in the preseason. There was some conversation going into the preseason. Is Quentin Byfield going to make this team or not? We're not really sure. He's very young. And in the preseason, the game that he got hurt, I literally turned to Zach and we had the conversation in the press box like, well, that answers that. He's making the team. He looks fantastic. and then he broke his ankle, or whatever the injury was, and he missed 40-something games. When he came back, the same challenges that would have faced Gabriel Velarde or any other young player were facing Quentin Byfield in that season. When he came back, the Deneau, Moore, and Arvidson line were, driving this team. Kaliev, Lemieux, and Lizotte had become a force. Adrian Kempe was on pace to score 35 goals, and you still had, Dustin Brown, Andreas Athanasiou, you still had veterans that they were trying to find minutes for in the midst of, I don't remember how many. I think we had 9 guys on the IR at one point, and we were looking to young players like, Rasmus Kupari, Jordan Spence, Quentin Byfield to come in. So Quentin Byfield was never given an opportunity the way like a Tim Stützle was, where he was told, okay, you can go play 20 minutes, be a -5, but if you get 2 points, we'll all sit here and talk about, what a clever pick it was. Quentin Byfield, I mean, the question I was asking everybody last season was, how often is a number 2 overall pick on a team that makes the playoffs the second year after he's in his D+2 year, right? Like, it doesn't happen. I think the last one we looked up was it Sagan in Boston, because they had made a trade and it wound up that the pick worked out that he got there, and he didn't play like a crucial role on that Boston team in his second year. So I think people need to take a look at the context of what's happened to Byfield in the 2 years since he's been drafted before they start worrying too much about his future.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too that I really like about Quentin Byfield, when he went second overall, I was like, that's a really good pick for the Kings. The Kings are gonna be super happy with this guy. And obviously, look, like you said, the fact that he got injured and then came back, it was kind of a tough, road for him to not only come back but play on a role where you've missed your first 40 games. Now you have to kind of work your way back up. It's tough to do that, especially when you've missed so much time. And also the fact that he missed a year because of the COVID pandemic and all that stuff too, that didn't help his development either. I think this is a guy that, in a couple of years, maybe 2-3 years down the road, we'll be looking at it and saying, this guy is actually one of the best players in the NHL. And I think he's going to be up there with, some of the best, because I do think he's underrated. I do think he's underappreciated. I think a lot of people, along with Alexis Lafreniere, are sleeping on them because of the fact that they came in from a pandemic year. And, they haven't really lived up to the hype right away, right? But I think, like you said, especially in the COVID year, you gotta have reasonable expectations. These guys missed a year of hockey, basically, essentially, and they lost a lot of time to development. And so I think they need to find that development again. And I think playing pro hockey and playing in the AHL, yes, it helps them, but injuries happen, and obviously they still have to develop to the best of their ability as well to get to that NHL level and become a regular in the lineup. So I do see Quentin Byfield making the team this year, and by making the team, I think he's going to be a regular 82 games unless he gets injured. And I do see him having obviously a career year, but I mean, a career year by his standards shouldn't be hard to do either. But just in terms of that, I think he's a guy that could easily, as a third line center, at least for this season, could be a guy that makes a huge difference for the LA Kings. So that's kind of my opinion. I don't know if Chris wants to chime in on this a little bit.
Yeah, actually, you kind of like, I'm going to segue into what you just said, because you mentioned a third line center, but I mean, listen, I know the projections aren't like official and like it could change at any time and they could shift it, but right now he's projected to play fourth line. Do you guys see him playing there or not at all, right?
I see third line.
It depends. Last season, I think it's fair to say that the third line on paper and the fourth line on paper played relatively even minutes. Jesse, I think that's fair.
Sounds right.
The Kings have Blake Lizotte, who's probably projected as the 3C in what you're looking at, Chris.
Yeah, correct.
Lizotte was typically the center of the fourth line. Byfield was typically the center of the third line. Sometimes the third line in close games, when the team was up a goal, wouldn't play as much because it was a little bit younger, not quite as defensively responsible, whereas a guy like Blake Lizotte, very defensively responsible, more of a two-way guy. Depends how you shake it out. I think that QB likely, assuming all goes according to plan during camp, you're probably looking at a 3C spot for him. But at the same time, you're probably not probably don't need to get that stuck up on like the label of the line, right? Like he'll probably center one of those two bottom lines. Obviously Kopitar and Deneau are pretty locked in as your 1 and your 2. And I think you should get plenty of opportunity this year.
And I think, having Dano and Kopitar there, Quentin Byfield's going to learn a lot from two fantastic players. And I think, once Kopitar does retire, he's going to obviously slot into a top six role. But, just looking at the 2020 NHL draft, a lot of the first round players that were selected haven't made the NHL yet, or they haven't had a huge impact. The only one that's really had a massive impact in terms of their team success is Lucas Raymond of the Detroit Red Wings. Alex Lafreniere is still playing third line minutes. Many of these guys here have, played a couple of games in the NHL, then got sent back to the AHL or just started their first season last year in the NHL. So, I think a lot of people need to relax in terms of, where they're projecting Quentin Biofield and calling him a bust. I think it's really premature of a statement to make in terms of that. But
I mean, there's also Anton Lundell in there, who's pretty good. You got Jimmy Drysdale from the Ducks, and a lot of these guys. I mean, they're gonna be playing this season, right? Caden Gooley, I'm convinced, gonna make the team this year for the Habs.
Yeah.
How many of those teams made the playoffs, though?
That's true. That's
Think
true.
about it like
Well,
this.
Lundell,
They will be playing. They will be making the playoffs this year. Like Ottawa's guaranteed playoff spots, right?
Are they?
I wouldn't put money
On paper, they look good.
On paper,
But we'll
on
see.
paper, sure, but I don't know. I wouldn't put money on Ottawa. Not that I wouldn't put money. I wouldn't risk that type of bet on Ottawa because I do think they're good enough. I don't think they're ready yet. Maybe, and the Atlantic is a tough team. Is a tough division to get into.
Yeah, and on another news, Dustin Brown retired from the LA Kings. He spent his whole career with the LA Kings, but when it was announced that he was getting a statue in honor of him and his number was being retired, a lot of people felt, why Dustin Brown out of all players? So I know, he was a former captain. Then he was stripped from that title and it was given to Anze Kopitar. He did play 1,296 games, 325 goals, 387 assists for a total of 712 points. So, it's very impressive in terms of his stats. So, I mean, I think he is deserving of what he was able to do with the LA Kings. He did win 2 Stanley Cups with the LA Kings. He was part of that, that dynasty in the 2010s of the LA Kings. So I think he's very deserving of that. And anyone that has, anything to say in terms of negativity, I think they just need to look at, the facts in terms of Dustin Brown.
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, I was very surprised when that happened. I didn't. I mean, you obviously look at LA and look at the LA sports teams, right? And look at the big name players that have played in LA. And obviously, you've got the LeBron James in basketball, and obviously David Beckham when he played in LA Galaxy as well. So you look at Kobe, obviously too as well, who is a great, and rest in peace Kobe. But just in terms of that, I think you look at where the athletes are in LA, and then you look at what Dustin Brown is, and you're like, okay, well, that doesn't really add up in terms of the fact that like elite talent. But obviously, we all know what Dustin Brown was capable of doing. He's a 2-time Stanley Cup winner. He's a guy who captained the LA Kings for many years. And I don't know necessarily, maybe I'm in the minority here. I don't know if a statue would be like maybe the right way to honor him. I think retiring his jersey makes sense. But in terms of a statue, I don't know. I think statue. I mean, for the type of player that he was, and obviously I didn't watch LA a lot, so I can't really give my full opinion on it. But just the type of player that he was, and kind of the fact that maybe he wasn't a big name, then maybe it doesn't really make sense to have him as a statue. But I mean, I don't know. I'm waiting to see what your thoughts are because I like I said, I don't really watch LA that much, so I don't want to say something that's a bit like controversial. It's just kind of my opinion on it.
Might have just answered your own question right there.
Well, does Gretzky have a statue?
Yeah, he was the first statue that went up.
Of course.
Okay, I would hope so because I'm like, if Gretzky doesn't have one and Dustin Brown does, there's a problem.
So, listen, I was a Kings fan for decades, and I went with my dad for years. Sat next to each other. The same seats for a very long time in the Forum. Then we switched to Staples Center, now Crypto.com Arena. Sat up in section 320. Was there in 2012 Game 6 in the stands with my dad. Cried like a baby when they won. We sat in the arena for an hour just watching everything happen and talking to the fans. Dustin Brown getting a statue is more about what that team meant to the fans than it is, I think, necessarily about recognizing the greatness of a singular athlete. And because the franchise had operated, I don't want to get into like a history lesson about the LA Kings, but for decades, the team would trade its first round pick. I mean, listen, the Montreal Canadiens got a plenty of first round picks from the Kings in exchange for Rick Martin, who played 4 games for us, or, the draft pick that turned into Raymond Bourque, although that was the Bruins, not the Habs. But the point is, like, the team would constantly trade its youth, constantly trade its first round picks to bring in stars from other teams that were, past their prime or never lived up to the promise. So when Dean Lombardi took over the team in 2006, Dustin Brown had already been drafted, and he was shortly named captain after that. I think it was 2008. And that team, for the first time in my life anyway, Kings fans got to watch a team that was drafted, grew up, developed, got competitive, and then made the leap from competitive to cup winner, and not just from competitive status to cup winner, but dominant cup winner. The kind of run in the Stanley Cup playoffs that you just don't see. They were up 3-0 on every opponent in every round of that playoff run. And the moment that Dustin Brown lifted the cup, for a fan base that, you mentioned all the other great LA athletes and, the Dodgers and the Lakers and, the Rams, I suppose. Kings fans live in the shadow of those accomplishments. We have shared a building with the Lakers, I think, since 1967. Every time the Lakers hang another championship banner, every time the Lakers retire another jersey, every time another Laker, rides off into the NBA sunset as a Hall of Fame, logo candidate, Kings fans had to watch with jealousy. So to finally have our own moment, to finally have our own team, and for it to be with a player who was not only drafted but now holds the record for most games played in an LA Kings jersey. Yeah, he's not Gordie Howe, but we don't care, and it's none of your business.
I think that was beautiful.
I apologize. I'll take it back.
No, it's fine.
No, I think my question too. I mean, I'm just gonna change topic here because I've already. Anyways, just in terms of that, I think like one of the guys that surprised me last year in LA, and I'm surprised because I thought that he was not done. I wouldn't say he was done, but I thought that he was on the decline and he wasn't going to come and bounce back. And that was Jonathan Quick. I mean, he put up really good numbers last year. He had a 9-10, a winning record. And obviously the year before that, actually the 3 years before that, he didn't look like the Jonathan Quick that everyone knew about, right? And then he comes in this season, puts up a 9-10, plays 46 games, outplays Cal Peterson as well. And, we're talking about 36-year-old Jonathan Quick being the starting goalie of the LA Kings and having, another one more year left at $5.8 million. This is a guy that I was, obviously he's a 2-time Stanley Cup champion. We know what he was capable of doing with the LA Kings in the past, but I was very surprised to see the performance that he put on this season and just how well he played, because, he didn't look like he was, going to ever turn into that again, especially after the last 3 seasons that he's had. So just kind of your thoughts on Jonathan Quick's, A, career, and B, just, the last couple of years, his decline, but also his bounce back, I would say, this season. And, maybe, is he going to continue that, you think, or you think it's Cal Peterson's net now moving forward? What do you guys think about that?
I think, I can touch more on this past year, and Jesse certainly has watched him for his entire career, but I think every time that you try to count Jonathan Quick out, or you try to say it's the goalie of the future and it's his time now, like, Jonathan Quick isn't eager to give that net up. He's not just going to step aside and accept that, maybe they gave another goaltender a long-term deal. They see this guy maybe as the goalie for the next several years. He's still a competitor, the ultimate competitor. He battles. His athleticism for his age is still absurd. And he had an excellent year. You see that experience in the net. You see how he kind of commands the game. And I think that, the decline in numbers certainly was there, right? That much is obvious. But if you look at the years that he struggled, the Kings were bad. Like the Kings weren't a good team in those years, and the Kings were a much better team last year. And it's not to say that he's a product of the team in front of him, because he's not. But it certainly plays a factor when you have a lot of inexperience on the blue line. You have a team that's not as defensively sound in front of you, maybe as it once was. And when you put all those factors together, you motivate Jonathan Quick, you put him behind a team that had a really strong year, that was sound defensively, and you still have a very athletic and skilled goaltender. I think you saw, what he's still capable of. And my opinion would be the best case scenario for the Kings is that both goalies are playing well, to where neither goalie's playing 60 games, because they're both solid for 41.
So essentially, they're going to be continuing the 1A, 1B goalie tandem system that they have in place since last year then.
I would think if all goes according to plan, right?
Yeah, I don't see how they can't, at least to start, because Cal Peterson has the contract and the designation, but Jonathan Quick in the playoffs last year, not game 2 or 3, but game 4 and 5 and game 6. Jonathan Quick was even game 7. He was outstanding. He was the guy. He's I mentioned earlier that Deneau is one of my top 10 favorite Kings of all time. Jonathan Quick is easily on that list, if not top 5. Jonathan Quick has been an absolute treat to watch.
He should definitely get a statue.
He will. And I will be very sad when Jonathan Quick is no longer playing for the Kings.
A lot of people count that out. Sorry, go ahead, Zach.
I think, Jesse, you'd probably agree with me that the best that the Kings played last year was when the goalies were alternating quality starts, right? There was that 2-month stretch, January to March, when the Kings were playing their best hockey of the year. It wasn't either goalie dominating the net. There was a very healthy rotation, and I think both guys were really strong at the same time. That's when the Kings had their most success last year.
And what I liked about LA last year is that they made the playoffs over Vegas and Vancouver, 2 teams.
I think he's cutting off.
Oh boy,
technical difficulty. Anyways, I'll just continue. Well, he was like Chris was mentioning before. The Kings made it in the playoffs ahead of Vancouver, ahead of Vegas, ahead of a few big teams. Especially Vegas was the one that surprised, I think, everybody. But just the fact that Vegas kind of struggled with injuries and stuff, and then you see where LA ended up and how they made it. Obviously there definitely is a rivalry, I would assume, between LA and Vegas a little bit. And obviously, what was your guys' thoughts just on the fact that Vegas missed the playoffs, but seeing the fact that LA Kings, who weren't expected to really make the playoffs, end up making it and, pushing, like I said before, earlier in the episode, pushing the Oilers to game 7 and ultimately almost winning that series. And I really wanted LA to win that series because it would have been really funny to see the Oilers get eliminated.
I would like to see that.
What was your thoughts on the fact that Vegas missed, but also the fact that did you guys expect LA to make the playoffs going into the season last year, or were you guys surprised that they made it?
I was sorry, go ahead, Zach.
I picked both teams to make the playoffs, Vegas and LA. I actually think I picked LA third in the division as they finished, but I mean, I certainly had Vegas as the division winner. They were rattled by injuries, but so were the Kings. So I think that I thought the Pacific was pretty wide open last year. You looked at, the Kings had flaws, but so did the Oilers, so did the Flames, so did Vancouver, Anaheim, San Jose. So I did think both teams would be playoff teams, but certainly externally, the hype around a team like LA was not anywhere near the level that it was around a team like Vegas.
I did not expect the Kings to make the playoffs. I'm pleasantly surprised that they did. And it's a ridiculous oversimplification, but I think that Phillip Deneau is the reason they made the playoffs and Vegas didn't, because both teams were hit by injuries. Both teams had key players that they expected to have out of the lineup. The difference is the Kings rallied around one another. At one point, Todd McClellan talked to us about a team playing for their goalie, right? And the power that can come from that. I think the Kings culture got incredibly strong this year. And I don't know this for a fact, but I would suspect certainly the rhetoric surrounding Vegas is that the mercenary nature with which they make their personnel decisions, I could imagine making it exponentially more difficult on them to rally around adversity. Whereas the way that the Kings have handled their business recently, I think could make it a lot easier to rally around adversity. And the end result is the Kings make the playoffs and Vegas misses the playoffs.
And do you guys think they're going to make the playoffs this year?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah, with adding Kevin Fiala for sure.
I
And
don't.
hopefully Drew Doughty actually plays if they do make the playoffs. Because I think if Drew Doughty was there, I think they would have beaten the Oilers.
Tell you what, no one wanted Drew Doughty to play in that series more than Drew Doughty.
That's right.
Who was probably lobbying to play with one hand every single day until they didn't let him. So he wanted to be out there as bad as we wanted to see him out there.
And like so many people had the Oilers winning in 4, and I'm like, come on, guys, you're counting out.
I actually had LA in 7. I actually had LA in 7.
Close.
I had the Oilers
I had
in
it in my
6.
bracket.
I had the Oilers in 6, but like, you know, when you have Philip Danault, you know, who just came off a huge playoff run going to the finals, and he played a huge part in their success in the playoffs. You know, like that guy was able to shut down, you know, great players on Toronto, Vegas, Winnipeg, and you know, and played against, you know, great players on Tampa Bay as well. So I knew he was fully capable of shutting down McDavid and Draisaitl. And unfortunately, you know, they didn't win. They lost in 7. But I thought that the LA Kings put up a fantastic fight and defied the odds essentially. And I do think they will make the playoffs this year. Are they going to finish 3rd in their division again? I don't know about that, but you know, maybe a wild card spot, but definitely will make the playoffs this year. And guys, who do you have as your breakout player heading into the season?
I mean,
Who wants to go first?
I guess I'll go first. I guess. Breakout player. I mean, I'm a big fan of this guy, and I think he'll do really, really well next year. I think if he gets given an opportunity to play top 6 minutes, which I don't know how likely that is, but I'm a big fan of Arthur Kaliev, and I think we can maybe see more out of him. He's a guy that when he was drafted was talked about as this elite goal scorer, elite sniper, a guy that could potentially score 30, maybe even 40 in the NHL at some point if he was, you know, to adapt the other parts of his game as well and become that player. And I think we saw bits and pieces of that in LA this year. You know, we saw the fact that this is a guy that can put the puck in the net. And I do think that on, you know, maybe with a better opportunity, maybe more power play time and an opportunity on the top 6, maybe he does get given that chance. And I think he can break out if he is given those opportunities. So I would say that my breakout player has to be Arthur Kaliev, just because I'm high on him too and I like him. So,
and I would agree on that too. You know, with Dustin Brown obviously retiring, not being there, he's going to move up in terms of his playing time and, you know, what he's capable of doing. And I think, you know, a common trend on the LA Kings right now, you know, we mentioned Velarde, we mentioned Byfield, we're mentioning Kaliev as well. These guys are going to be given opportunities now to, you know, produce and show what they're capable of, you know, potentially reaching expectations or maybe even, you know, surpassing expectations. So I think the opportunity is there for all 3 of them to succeed. But I think Kaliev, you know, does have what it takes to be this year's breakout star for the LA Kings.
Artie's definitely a good answer. Played 4th line minutes all of last year, played the full year in the NHL, which is important. But I think a lot of people are expecting him to take the strides for sure this year to be a top 9 player. Since you took the easy candidate, Luca, I'm going to go with I'm going to say Mikey Anderson, and it's a different type of answer. Mikey Anderson is unlikely to be a high production player from an offensive standpoint. And Mikey Anderson is already a very good defenseman, but maybe this is the year that people start to realize it. This is a guy who came out of college, made his debut his first year. In his next 2 years in the league, he played on the top pair for a team with Drew Doughty. Drew Doughty loves playing with Mikey Anderson, but maybe he doesn't quite get the accolades that a young player who plays that type of role gets. You still see him in young prospect rankings ranked so low, people low on his upside because he doesn't produce offensively. And maybe, this is the year that he gets a little bit more recognition for the things that he brings, because he contributes so many different ways out of the Kings with his stability and his play on the back end, and his character.
That's a great answer. I love, Zach's probably tired of hearing me talk about Mikey Anderson and Drew Doughty as a defensive as a pair. I'm going to go ahead and say Byfield, mainly because last year I really think if you weren't Trevor Moore, Deneau, Arvidson, Kempe, Lizotte, Lemieux, or Kaliev, you were struggling to figure out where you fit on the team. This was sort of a 2.5 line team, and then trying to sort out the rest of the pieces into some sort of puzzle. This year, assuming full health, Quentin Byfield will have line mates that he plays with all year long, whether it's Carl Grundstrom, Arthur Kaliev, Gabriel Velarde, Alex Iafallo, who knows who it is. But he'll have an opportunity to develop chemistry, to develop an identity behind Kopitar and Deneau, Fiala, Arvidson, all those guys. And I just think we will finally, put all of those questions about his draft stock to rest.
And you, Chris?
And yeah, I'm gonna go with Quentin Byfield as well. He's played only 46 games last year, 11 points. That doesn't really do him justice. He hasn't played a full season. He's gonna be coming in healthy. If all goes well, knock on wood. I would be pretty shocked. I think it would be cool to see. Maybe he's gonna break out so much that Danault gets bumped down to third line, but we'll see. I don't know how possible that is, but it could happen.
Maybe offensively, but in terms of
offensively,
the two-way game, Danault is the embodiment of that.
I mean, when we were, I don't want to hate on Danault or anything, but when he left Montreal, we were all like, yeah, it's okay, it's Danault.
We all ate our words for that.
And we all ate our words. But listen, he had a great season last year. For it to be repeated, I think he's gonna decrease a little bit, and I think Quentin Byfield. Listen, if he excels and just becomes this elite player, like a Lucas Raymond, let's say, kind of guy, just blows up like that, I think he would move up in the lineup.
He definitely has the potential to do so, and I think Danault is going to continue being consistent in terms of his level of production and points, but I do think Quentin Biofield will have a huge impact on the team. Maybe not next year, but definitely within the years to come. But, just looking at, the team as a whole, what would you say is the weakest part for the LA Kings? I know when looking at their defense, it's not the flashiest defense. I know you have Alexander Edler, who's up there in age, Drew Doughty, who's up there in age, and the rest of the guys are pretty young in age. But do you think that's an area where the Kings need to improve, or are you satisfied with the Kings decor?
If I look at the defensemen, I think that they have the talent that they need. But if you look at last year's injuries and consistency, there was none. They used, I think, 14 defensemen last year, which is more than 2 full teams worth of defensemen. To me, I think it's a consistency thing when it comes to the D. Getting health, getting the right pairs and players playing with each other for 70 games, not for 30 games. You're certainly banking on some development. You have young guys like Anderson, like Bjorn Foote, like Dursey. You've got Sean Walker coming back off an injury. You have Drew Doughty coming back off an injury. So it's certainly not without some question marks. But if you can consistently get that top group of 7 for the bulk of the season, I think you have guys who have the ability to be a very solid group, even if, like you said, maybe not the flashiest group in the league.
The defense is probably the thing that I'm least concerned about heading into this season. I understand that, on paper, your average, NHL fan outside of LA doesn't know all 14 names that they played on the blue line last year. If I asked you 3 guys, what do you know about Jacob Mouvrare? Have you got anything?
I know he was
Right.
an AHLer, and that's about it.
I love Jacob Muvarari. The team loves Jacob Muvarari. They just signed him to a 2-year extension, the second year being a one-way deal, the first year being a two-way deal. So, like, yeah, I'm not worried about the defense. I know that, again, on paper, there might be some curiosity, and tons of fans out here wanted them to acquire Jacob Chikrin again because of that sort of meaningless draft stock. But I'm not worried about the defense. I am most worried is not the right word. I'm most curious about the third line, for lack of, you can call it the third line, you can call it the fourth line, whatever you want. I feel like we have a pretty solid set of expectations for Kopitar, Kempe, Danault, Arvidson, Moore now, Lizotte, Lemieux, Kaliev. Be nice to see him continue to develop. But that Quentin Byfield, Gabriel Velarde, Rasmus Kupari, Elias Anderson, the 2017 to 2020 draft classes. That's the big point of curiosity for me. What's Rasmus Kupari going to turn into? Will Elias Anderson find a permanent home with the LA Kings? Will Quentin Byfield live up, become the breakout star that Chris and I said he would?
And one guy that you guys haven't mentioned, and actually I want to talk about real quick, and it was actually in the comments, but I'll actually bring it up right now. But they basically 2001, Lex Talionis asked, where do you guys see Turcotte's future with the Kings? This is a guy that was drafted, I believe he was 8th overall, if I'm not mistaken.
Fifth.
5th overall, that's it. And obviously, he was pretty hyped up along with Trevor Zegras and Caulfield in that draft and that stacked draft. And obviously, he's had his struggles. Hasn't really played at the NHL level that much. I think played 8 games last year, had no points. Where do you guys see him in his development? Do you guys see him as a guy that could fight for a roster spot this year? Do you think he still needs a little bit more development in the AHL before he makes the jump?
Number one question is certainly health. He got absolutely blown up in the playoffs in the AHL last year at a legal hit to the head. So that cost him the end of his season. So I think the big thing is, one, does he come into camp 100% healthy? And if he does, step 2 is playing consistent games. If you look at how the Kings are currently aligned, more likely than not, Alex Turcotte would start in the AHL. You want to see him play a top 6 role in the AHL if he is there. You want to see him produce offensively, but you also want to see him play his game, which isn't just about producing points. It's high compete. It's high competitiveness. It's pesky on the forecheck. It's high energy. Is he a center? Is he a wing? You guys have mentioned it. The Kings have Kopitar, Danault, Byfield, Lizotte down the middle. Is his future going to be in one of those 4 center spots? Or maybe does he transition to the wing, and maybe does he make the NHL on the wing? So I think this is a big year for Alex Turcotte. I think it's important for him to play a lot of games, regardless of league, to finally have a year when he can play a full season of professional hockey. And then you see where his development's at. You want to see him succeed and start to dominate in the AHL. And then you hope to see some of that progress transfer up to the NHL.
And what's crazy about the LA Kings is that they have so many talented, prospects in the system, but they've all dealt with injuries that, unfortunately, cut their progress, and, they haven't become the players that, a lot of people were hoping for. But, we're all hoping that, they're going to be healthy moving forward, and they could turn out to become those players with those high expectations. So, I mean, I think Alex Turcotte is a fantastic player. I know people are saying these crazy things because I know it was announced today that Nils Lundqvist was in trade rumors because he asked for a trade, and people were mentioning Alex Turcotte in part of a deal for Nils Lundqvist, and I thought that was absolutely ludicrous in terms of that. So, I think Alex Turcotte, people need to calm down again. Same thing with Velarde, same thing with Byfield. They just need to wait for these guys to get healthy again, and they have the opportunity there to make the team. So, and to produce at a high level as well. So, I think expectations need to be, tempered with, like Jesse was saying before, and people just need to cool down and not call these guys busts because they've got injuries.
I think the Kings are also. This is a conversation that I see taking place a lot within Kings fan circles a lot. there's concern that Quentin Byfield, Alex Turcotte, Gabriel Velarde, Rasmus Kupari are not already producing the way that Anze Kopitar was, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years after he hit the NHL. And the thing that I keep coming back to is Anze Kopitar is still in the NHL. So Quentin Byfield can't be the Kings' number one center. Gabriel Velarde can't be the Kings' number one center. Rasmus Kupari can't be the Kings' number one center because we still have our number one center. When, Jamie Drysdale or Trevor Zegras get drafted by the Ducks and we have to watch them, right? They're on the same cable channel as we are. Their, stories show up in the newspapers. The people that we go to work with, well, not Zach and I, but other people that go to work will have to, have friends and coworkers that are Ducks fans that will talk about these young players. And there is an element of, I call it Zegras envy, right? Where you go, okay, well, why doesn't my team have that one young guy who's on the cover of NHL, of EA Sports NHL franchise? Why does my team not have the guy who's flipping the puck over the net and is on highlights and is at the All-Star game with a blindfold and doing all this incredible stuff? And I asked you guys sort of flippantly earlier, Chris, when you were rattling off all the good young players, but I wasn't being totally sarcastic. Yeah, the Ducks have Terry and Zegras and Drysdale, and they missed the playoffs.
It's true.
So, I mean, maybe Zegras will wind up winning the Cup 5 times, and Quentin Byfield will win it none, and maybe I'll look like an idiot going back and watching this again. But yeah, one of the reasons I love Jonathan Quick and Daryl Sutter has made similar comments is the only thing that really matters at the end of the day to me is how many wins the team has at the end of the year. It's fun to go online and compare prospects. It's fun to complain about development tracks and everything. But at the end of the day, the one thing I really care about as a fan that watched this team not win for 30 years is, will they have success as a team? And everything else is in service of that. So
and they've proven that, this past season where they defined the expectations and they made the playoffs and they finished third in their division, and they were dealt what injuries as well. And imagine a healthy LA Kings team, especially with these young guys on the team, reaching their plateau essentially and starting to produce at the level that they're expected to produce. It should only get better from now on. And I just think that a lot of people are you just want to create controversy by saying this guy's a bust and let's compare prospects and stuff. It just gives essentially a topic that for people to speak about, and I think people need to relax with that.
You need a better representation of the importance of patience. If you're calling a 20 or a 21-year-old player a bust, look at Adrian Kempe. Adrian Kempe was a first-round pick, and he broke out as a 25-year-old player this year. Scored 35 goals for the first time as a 25-year-old player. Yeah. And if he was given up on at the time when people seem to want to give up on prospects, he would not have scored 35 goals for the LA Kings because he would have been traded or released or done whatever to 3 years earlier. So I think when you look at a guy like that, it shows that players develop at different rates. They have different development curves. Some players need to go through different struggles. Some players, it'll click right away. But for those who it doesn't, if you believe in the player and you believe that his upside is what Adrian Kempe's was, don't give up on that player at 21 because he'll score 35 goals for someone else at 25.
Yeah, like Jesse was saying, there's always context behind, why a player is not producing at the level that he's producing at. And, in terms of the LA Kings prospects, there is context behind that. And, people, they don't do their research essentially. So, it's easy to say a player is a bust without really doing your research. And, players tend to reach their prime ages from around 25 to 26 years old. Kempe is a perfect example of that. So who says that the prospects we mentioned don't do the same thing as well? But with that being said, essentially, I don't know if you guys have anything else to add in terms of today's topic.
I'm okay.
Perfect. Well, guys, we just want to thank Zach and Jesse for coming on our podcast today. It really means a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves.
Absolutely. Anytime I can gloat about Philip Deneau to a bunch of fans of the team that gave him up.
Well, I know a lot of Habs fans watching this video are gonna realize, what they truly gave up in Philip Danault. That continue to still doubt him and say that Danault had a fluke season. I think people are gonna, be proven wrong once again this upcoming season.
It wasn't
But with
just
that
a guy
being,
that eats pizza.
yeah. But with that
Can
being,
I ask? Let me ask you guys something real quick though.
Yeah.
I assume you guys are all relatively young. The name of the
Yes.
Young Guns podcast. None of you have silver in your beard like me. If I offered you right now in a trade Philip Danault for the 1993 Stanley Cup banner, would you take it?
No chance. No chance. No chance.
No chance.
No
Well,
chance.
no chance.
No
I mean,
chance.
we'd still have the most Stanley Cups in the league.
Sure.
No chance.
Don't even
Right?
need it.
No,
Don't
no,
even need
no
it. We
chance.
could give up the like 4 or 5, right? Wait, who's the second? I think it's Detroit with 6. No, it's
No,
That's the
Toronto.
Leafs.
Toronto.
Yeah.
Toronto.
Toronto.
Others
But-
don't count. It's been over after 50 years. You start
Yeah.
cutting off.
But no, I think with Danault, just one last thing. I think with Danault, what's interesting, you look at what his numbers in LA and how he played in LA. I think in Montreal there was a different coaching staff and just a different way of playing as well. I think in Montreal he was looked at as the guy that's literally going to go and hey, your job is to shut down McDavid and that's it. Your job is not to create offense. Your job is not to do anything else other than to when the best players are on the ice, you're on the ice and you're shutting them down. So am I surprised that Danault took a step up a little bit in terms of his goal scoring? So I didn't think he had 27 goals in him, but I'm not surprised that he did well in LA because I think he was a capable player and I think he was a solid player for Montreal, and I think he was able to do that in LA. I'm just surprised that he had this offensive the offensive numbers that he put up in LA. I didn't expect that, and we never saw that really in Montreal. So that's kind of my
in my eyes, he's arguably the most underrated two-way centerman in the league. He's had sulky votes in the past, so I mean, it's not a surprise there.
He's definitely underrated.
Yeah, especially when you have Kopitar being a first-line center, and he's a sulky nominee in many years. I'm not sure if he's ever won it. Maybe once. Yeah.
Kopitar has.
Oh, Kopitar,
yeah.
Okay.
There's a guy named Ken Belke who runs the Sin Bin blog in Vegas. If you guys ever want to do a Vegas preview show, I'd highly recommend reaching out to him. I'll vouch for you. But he talked about the possibility of Danault winding up in Vegas rather than LA. And I can't tell you how thrilled I am that didn't happen.
Yeah, there was a rumor. Well, I think there was a rumor when he was available that it was between LA and Vegas, and I think a lot of Montreal news outlets, maybe not the most reliable people, were tweeting out that he was ending up in Vegas, and then all of a sudden Elliot Friedman comes out and says no, he's actually ending up in LA. So it was just, I mean, he ended up going not far off, but it's still pretty surprising. But
yeah, they needed a first line center. They got Jack Eichel, and we all know how that turned out.
The rest is history.
But guys, once again, thank you so much. We really appreciate you guys coming on today. We had an incredible time with you guys, learning a lot about the LA Kings, things that we didn't know, and I hope our viewers learn a lot about the LA Kings heading into the season. But guys, don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, and recommend this video to any LA Kings fan. I think they're really going to appreciate it. And thank you so much, guys, once again, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Young Guns podcast.